Hello, these are flipped notes 4-6, social cognitive learning with observational learning, which is the last section of Unit 4 on learning. My Bitmoji is doing some observing because this last section is all about how we learn really just by watching and imitating others. Let's get to it. So, cognitive social theory and observational learning really emphasize the role of the environment on just learning through watching others. With observational learning, there's imitation of models involved. And with cognitive social theory, it emphasizes a little bit more on the cognitive or thinking processes that you see something, you think about it, and then you mimic it. We've already talked about a little bit of cognitive social learning. We just didn't really call it that. Insight learning is a type of cognitive learning because we're learning by reorganizing our thinking. Cognitive maps is a type of cognitive learning, like Tolman's rats were doing with the mazes. Latent learning, and then a new term here, scaffolding, which is where we're able to build on learning that we've already done, especially with the assistance from somebody who is more advanced. So it's kind of like getting tutoring. But all those are types of cognitive social learning. This entire unit with classical and operant and now social learning are all parts of behaviorism. So we're summarizing some behaviorist assumptions here. Behaviorists focus on observable behavior. This is in contrast to things like what Freud was studying, which was all about the unconscious mind, or looking at studying like parts of the brain. Anything that can't be observed, they don't pay attention to it in behaviorism. Nearly all behavior is learned. They do recognize that there are some things that are instincts, but most behavior is learned. There's a lot more focus on experimentation rather than just speculation. And that's why we've had Pavlov's experiments and Skinner's experiments. And then in this section, we'll have Bandura. Behaviorists believe in the idea of environmental determinism, that you start out with a tabula rasa or a blank slate that is not really affected by genes. And then finally, this section does believe, our behaviorists do believe, that animal research can be generalized to humans. So all these experiments with Pavlov's dogs, with pigeons, they believe that those will apply to human behavior as well. Looking a little bit about how behaviorism has evolved, really where we've started with this unit to where we've ended up, started with Pavlov and classical conditioning, and then it got to Skinner with operant conditioning. And really, remember, Thorndike actually came a little before Skinner, but Skinner is the one who made operant conditioning popular. And then the most recent part or addition to behaviorism is Bandura and his theories of social modeling. So let's talk about Albert Bandura's social learning theory. So when he said it came to observational learning, there's some different things that have to occur. First, you actually do need to pay attention and perceive somebody's behaviors and look if there's a reward or punishment. So this is not like latent learning where, you saw stuff, you picked up on it somehow, but it wasn't very conscious. This is intentional. You have to remember the behavior. You're reproducing the behavior. So you're doing it again, and then you need to be motivated somehow to learn and carry out the behavior. Bandura said that acquisition was not the same thing as performance. That behavior can be learned even if you're not being reinforced, like what Skinner said. Skinner said you had to have a reward or a punishment. But Bandura says there's some things that we learn way too fast that we just don't have time to reward and punish them. For example, language. We learn so many words that we can't possibly be using reinforcement for all of that. So some of it just has to be through social experiences. Bandura is most famous for his Bobo doll study. And when we're in class, we'll watch footage of the study. A Bobo doll is sort of a punching bag toy like the one here on the right, where if you punch it, it falls down and it bounces back up again. What he wanted to know was when children watched adults who were being rewarded for aggression or who were just acting aggressively, would those children also act aggressively? So the experiment was done. This was 1961, 36 boys and 36 girls, with some of the children being exposed to an aggressive model or some children watching somebody who was not playing with the toy aggressively. And then they were going to measure how much did they imitate the model after their exposure. So here's just a clip from what the video will look like, but we'll watch that in class. Oh, my video got stuck. Sorry, I meant to hide these 2 slides. Come on, get out of here. All right. Did I skip a page? So what they found were that lots of children who were in the aggressive condition had significantly higher scores, that when children watched somebody being aggressive with the doll, that they too were extremely aggressive. The thinking at this time, though, was a lot different. They believed that when somebody watched something with aggression in it, like a movie with a lot of violence, they believed that that would lower their own aggression models or levels. So they thought that the children would actually be less aggressive, that it would inhibit their aggression. And instead, the children ended up being more aggressive with the Bobo doll than what the adults had been. So the conclusions that Bandura came up with is that aggression can be a learned behavior, that it's not just a built-in inbuilt instinct, that those kids weren't being rewarded or anything. They were only watching. And when they watched it, they learned. Modeling is very powerful and it was very quick. They only saw it once and then they copied the behavior. In further studies, he did some other stuff. He had children watch aggressive film clips instead of a live model, and he found that the filmed models produced even more aggression. If the model was rewarded, like they praised the person who was being aggressive, the children imitated them even more. So Bandura's research goes on to be the first generation of scientific research on the effects of media violence on children. So all kinds of studies later on that were concerned about like Grand Theft Auto and Call of Duty and those types of games where people, excuse me, where kids were learning aggressive behavior. Those studies were first similar to these from Bandura. So the implications of Bandura's research, the Bobo doll study tells us about the effects of TV on children, but the films in the study were not like real life. So they said it couldn't really be generalized. Participants in an experiment know they're gonna be in an experiment, so they just thought, well, what am I supposed to do? It's a Bobo doll. You're supposed to hit them. The study did not look at any kind of long-term effects. The aggression towards an inanimate, they were only being aggressive towards a toy and not towards a living being. And what else are you going to do with a Bobo doll? You're supposed to hit them. The children were not punished for their behavior. So the other people had said, well, if you had stopped the kids right away, they would have stopped being aggressive. Some other applications of the observational learning. The good news is that the study showed that people mimic positive and helpful models and have pro-social effects. The bad news is that they also mimic the bad stuff, antisocial models, that they mimic and show antisocial effects. Some other implications of observational learning, it really depends on who the models are. We tend to mimic and imitate people who we perceive as similar to us, who we think are successful or admirable, and if their behaviors are consistent. And then finally, a couple more things. Remember that behaviorists did believe that most behavior was learned. Instincts are what we call innate behaviors that are inborn. And then there was that last little part there. This was actually in the very first section about biological preparedness and instinctive drift. That the evolutionary theories say that there are just some things that we are able to form associations with more quickly, and other things where even if we do learn a conditioned response, we're going to drift back towards our natural response. All right, that's it for 4-6 and all of Unit 4.